Another episode of the Mr. J Show. How are you? Maybe the camera's a little crooked right now, it's hard to tell. But aren't we all a little crooked? Maybe that's the theme of today's episode or commentary. I've been thinking about this one for a while, and it just so happened there was this article on the New York Times, which I read online yesterday or the day before. A writer on the New York Times who has proclaimed, it was an opinion piece, and he was defending his decision, his right to deliberately default on his student loans and to ignore them. And it's a pretty timely issue, so I thought I'd talk about it. Plus, it's an issue that affects me because I have defaulted on my student loans, too. I paid off part of them. Now, this writer in the New York Times, it so happens that he's published 5 books, and he's written for the New Yorker and New York Magazine, and obviously now the New York Times, so he's got a big body of work, and presumably, this is the part I don't understand. He must have some means of paying off his student loans, so I don't see why it would be defensible. However, it's a timely issue, really timely. It's been a timely issue for a long time because student loan debt is a killer. It is an absolute problem. It could be a permanent ticket to the poorhouse, really. And I managed to pay off a large chunk of my student loans through the sale of a movie I made called Book Wars, my first feature. But I also went, like this writer in the New York Times, I went to school for an arts degree, and I made this decision when I was 17 years old to take out these loans based on what I could perceive at the time from the university and from the general atmosphere and environment of higher education. It seemed like it was an investment that would pay off. And for me, it was really a crippling decision. I would absolutely not recommend anybody take out a single dime of student loans if you can avoid it. It so happens I went to a pretty expensive school, but I had half of that paid for with scholarships. I had a trustee scholarship. I had a caddy scholarship from working as a caddy when I was a teenager. I had some local scholarships from Ohio where I grew up. And so I went to a pretty expensive arts and film school in New York City. I won't say exactly which one because they'll think I'm being all sour grapes. And you know, you're supposed to be like a cheerleader for your alma mater perpetually, or you're banished. But I will say it was a decision I made that when I was 17 years old, and I'm 46 now, nearly 30 years later, it's haunted me to this day. Now, first of all, I tried to pay off as much as I could. I tried to find work. And a lot of that time, post-college years, it was very challenging to find work, especially after 9/11 occurred. I found work in New York after 9/11 cleaning up at the disaster site with this company called Maxon's Restorations. And I had various odd jobs and freelance jobs. I was a street bookseller, as some of you may know, when I made that movie, Book Wars. I took temp jobs. I took any job I could find. The fact is, there wasn't, as far as I could discern, I didn't even know there was a career center at my school until a year ago. I didn't know. And so, if you look at education as an investment, then taking out loans for this investment if you're going to take out loans, there must be a guarantee of recouping that investment in advance. That would be my advice to anybody who's considering taking out student loans. Do not take out student loans on spec, period. Do not take out student loans if you are hoping or thinking that it might pay off. Look at it as a business investment. If you're going to take out these loans, then you should have some palpable, definite, contractual linkage to work or a career afterwards based upon attending that school and achieving that degree. That's how closely linked it must be, in my mind, to be risk-free. So I would not advise anybody to take out a single dime of student loans unless there is a palpable, real, written, nearly contractual link between your attendance, your achievement of a degree, and your career. Do not go to school and take out loans if you're thinking it's a good idea, or if you are banking or hoping that it will pay off. It won't. It might not, and you'll be fucked. Your credit will be fucked through your adult life. I went back to the States recently and did a lot of research trying to probe and figure out which student loans I still owed because they were so old and some of them were delinquent. And I did research at, apparently my loans went from one agency to another agency, and then that second agency failed to recognize the actual verifiable payments I had made. So now it's back up to, according to them, it's as if I haven't paid anything. But I have. NYU, well, now I told you where I went to school. NYU would not release my transcripts to find work unless I had paid off my Perkins loans, my NDSL loans or whatever they're called. So I paid those off in one lump based upon the TV sales of Book Wars. Those were the first loans I paid off because I couldn't get my transcripts otherwise in order to find work. That's the system. I'm not dissing or singling out NYU necessarily, although I think it's systemic of the entire industry, the higher education industry. It's on par with those zero-interest loans which destroyed the housing industry. I'm accountable. I made a decision when I was 17, for whatever that's worth. I mean, how mature of a decision that could be, one can only surmise, but I'm accountable. I made the decision, but it's haunted me to this day and made it very, very challenging to achieve some means of getting other work. Hold on a second. So, where were we at? We're talking about student loans. I see both sides of the argument. I would disagree with the writer of that article from the New York Times who said essentially, I think I have a moral right to default on the loans, despite the fact that now I'm working for these major publications and so forth. No, he doesn't have a moral right. The solution is, in fact, don't take out the fucking loans in the first place. I'm begging you. Anyone who's considering taking out student loans, do so at your own risk. You are accountable, and it will plague you if you don't pay them off. So the solution, I would say, my response to the New York Times article that appeared the other day would be, if you took out the loans, you've got to try to pay them off. Look at my situation. I didn't even know there was a career center at NYU. It was very hard for me as an Bachelor of Fine Arts student to find work. I couldn't even get my transcripts until I paid off the loans. So imagine if I hadn't been able to sell my first feature, I would have been caught in this poverty trap. I still was largely affected by essentially a poverty trap. But I'm accountable. I made a decision when I was 17 which affects me for the rest of my life. or until I can track down who actually maintains these loans now and reckon with them to prove the amount that I've actually paid. Because these loans are handed off from one agency to another as they travel through the system, and they are traded and rolled over. And I looked online at the records, and I didn't see any record of my payments to the current management company. And I tried to contact them. I sent them registered letters. I called them. I emailed them. No response. I guess I have to go in person. But in the meantime, my credit, actually, when I was back in the States on this past summer, I made a point of contacting Experian and TransUnion and all these other companies, the big three credit reporters, to try to get a copy of my credit reports. And they said, oh, there's no data. How can we give you a report? I said, what do you mean there's no data? At one point I had debit cards or credit cards, and I paid those off at least. Another story, based on the making of my first independent movie, Charlie's Box, which I made freshly out of NYU Film School. It was an independent film. It was all the rage at the time to fund your movie on credit cards. Even our professors at NYU were saying, hey, you just fund your movie on credit cards. That was the whole thing. Those were the days of Slackers and Clerks and all those movies. So I did. I made this movie, Charlie's Box, using my credit cards. And you know what? I paid them off eventually, but the tow truck company took one of my credit cards because my car had broken down, and I had 2 cards left. And one of them was totally delinquent. They took that one. So no, don't ever, I would say don't ever take out a loan, period, if you really want to be extreme about it. But the problem is, going back to my credit history thing, if you don't take out any credit, if you don't borrow, then you have no credit history. You see, and I became so paranoid after defaulting on my student loans and the making of that movie using my credit cards, which I paid off. I paid off those credit cards to make the movie. But it wasn't romantic like they talked about in film school. It was eating rice and beans for 5 years and not getting any of the $5,000 back that I spent on making the movie. That's the reality. That's the reality. So if you don't borrow here and there, you're not going to have a credit history, and then you don't exist. So TransUnion, one of the credit companies who I insisted, I said, I've got to get some kind of copy of my credit history. And they said, well, there's nothing there. There's nothing listed. And I said, how could that be? Last time I checked, there was something. They said, well, we don't have any data. And that's because I only use debit cards now. I don't have credit cards now because I'm so averse to debt and borrowing. So I said, look, just print out the empty form. I need something to show. So this is a monologue, I guess, about debt in American society, which you know has been a raging issue for a long time. I'm definitely not the first person to talk about it. We're not the first ones to talk about debt and the life of indentured servitude it can create. But I am here to say that you should, anyone watching this, I would say avoid taking out student loans unless your life depends on it. Unless you have an ironclad contract that with a future employer that says, we guarantee you this level of employment with an advance pending your achievement of this degree. That's the only instance in which I would say it's worth assuming that level of debt or worth taking on that debt. Otherwise, run from student loans. Do not take out a student loan if you think it might help you. Do not take out a student loan if you are guesstimating that it will help you achieve a better career. Run from it. Run away. unless you have an ironclad link between your loan and a future employer that states that you will have some mechanism to pay off this loan based upon the achievement of that degree. Otherwise, I would run, get the fuck out of there, run. So the guy from the New York Times who said, I deserve to default on it, it's morally reprehensible that they're preying upon students. It is morally reprehensible. I think that whole system needs to be changed. But look, if you're a writer and you've written, now you're published with the New York Times and you've got 5 books out, surely you can pay off your loans now. The time to default on your student loans is when you're struggling to get your break. But when you've made your break, if that ever happens, yes, you've got to pay them off. I mean, I haven't been able to pay off all of them myself. I paid off some, but overall it was not worth it. It negatively, severely negatively impacted more than half of my life. And I'm begging you, anyone who's watching this, stay away from student loans unless you can find a way to make sure that it's risk-free, or 0.1% risk is involved. In other words, only if by taking out that loan and getting that certificate or degree will you get a job. A definite linkage between those in writing with the employer. And if it's guaranteed, then they should give you an advance and pay for the degree. So it shouldn't even be on spec, right? So you shouldn't take out the loan. If an employer promises you employment based upon the achievement of a certain degree, then they should foot the bill. I have a friend whose company paid for his attendance at Wharton Business School because it enhanced his employability and his value to their company. So they paid for it. That's the way it should be. Run from the student loans. Run. Do not walk. Run. Do not take out student loans unless there is absolutely no other alternative. And I would say there are plenty of alternatives. Don't do it. Do not do it. Don't do it. That's what the point of this Mr. J show is. There was another topic, but let's keep it on education because I just came back from teaching. I hope you noticed I'm dressed up with a tie. Hey, I got work here in Asia when I was banging my head against a brick wall in the United States for months and months and months. I don't know. What does that tell you? So I've just come back from work. I've got my tie on, so I figured I'd look more official. And you'd believe me when I hope you believe me anyway, don't take out the loans. Do not take out student loans. Run. They're depending on you to take them out. Don't do it. Don't fall for the trap. They'll tell you, that it will help you to get a liberal arts education and you need it in society. Don't do it. Run. Run away. Get a practical certificate of some kind. Run away from the student loans if they're on spec. Run. Run away from them. Don't take them out.
Don't take them out. I'm serious. I'm serious.